You got a question?
Hi, my name is Max Fine. It is Sunday, June 25th, 2023, about 1:30 p.m. And we're gonna do a nice interview with Opa here. So I'm gonna change the video. Hi, Opa. What would you
Hello.
like to start talking about? You want to tell me about your childhood and the family in South Africa and the people that you knew and then how you came to America?
Oh, yeah. Let me try and start chronologically. I had 28 first cousins, very large family. My father was one of, he had a brother Mike, a brother Sam, a brother Jaime, a brother Daniel, a sister Mamie, and a sister Sarah. And they all had children except Sarah. And my mother had a lot of sisters, Chicky, Eva, Jenny, Ray, and a brother, Sunken. They were the closest. She was her married name. Her maiden name was in Schlossberg, and so each of those aunts and uncles had multiple children. So we grew up in a very, very large, closely knit family. And my father was sort of the head of the family in a way because he was the doctor and would go around and see them all. But he would be the one to always be driving around visiting them. My father was a family physician who did hospitals. So all the time he would be driving from house to house. And if you wanted to spend any time with my father, you had to go with him in his car while he went from patient to patient. And he liked doing that because a lot of the patients knew him, not only family, but all his other patients, and they'd always have a nibble of food for him, his favorite piece of cheesecake or slice of beef or whatever it was. So he had a way of the time going from house to house. He could not understand American medicine where you went into the doctor's office and never saw the home because so much was in the home. And when we came to America, he would say, "I don't understand how it can work here." Mrs. van der Merwe would come into me with a terrible headache. She'd come into my office, and I could prescribe a whole lot of tests to see if she's got a problem with the brain, or a cancer, or having a stroke, or what else can cause headaches. I go into the home and I see that her husband's lost his job. He's screaming at her, beating the hell out of her and the kids. Of course she's got a headache. She's under stress. And how can you diagnose that if you're not in the home and going to the home? But growing up in South Africa on the Jewish holidays, the family would get together at one uncle or aunt or our house. And it was a very, very close-knit family. We saw all the cousins and uncles and aunts at least once every couple of months. So it was very, very close. The oldest was my father's eldest brother was Jaime, and who I'm named after. And he had children, Miriam, David, and Israel, and moved to Israel afterwards.
That's the
And
David in Israel who I've met the grandchildren of.
yes,
They live on the
yes,
okay.
and a daughter, Miriam, and Miriam has two children living in London right now, Sharon and Gail. She had a third child, Saul, who I believe, a blue baby, a spastic, and he lived in South Africa in an institution and died there a number of years ago. Jaime, before I was born, was killed in a car crash. He was a gambler going to watch the Durban July.
Which Jaime was the cousin?
My father's brother,
Okay.
who my father just worshipped.
Hmm.
And he was killed in a car crash going to watch the Durban July, because of a big horse race of the year in South Africa. And my father always used to say how if that had happened just a few years later, they could have saved his life because he had broken ribs and they didn't know how to treat that. And he died. Today, as he put it today, which was like 40 years ago, they treated that by just strapping the chest so that the chest couldn't move and the person survived that kind of catastrophic injury.
You mean like a seatbelt or like a thing that you
just like put straps around the chest to just hold the chest in place while the bones heal. My father was very close to the family, and a number of the family, there were issues. His brother Daniel was a gambler, another gambler, and gambled a lot, and to the point where his family, and he had 3 children. Hillary was the oldest, a few years older than me. Joan was a few years younger than me, and then Nikki. And he just didn't have money for food because he was a traveling salesman, would do very well on a horse race, and then they'd have plenty of everything and then nothing. So the family used to get together and have to supply food. And my father would drop it off, and Mamie and Sarah and all the rest of the family would provide the food for the family. And they were a close-knit family and did this in their stride.
Can you tell me about my great grandfather, your father, Dr. Morris Fine? And tell me about your mom, Esther Eki.
My father was qualified for medicine. He was the first person in the family to go to university and became a doctor. And just about then, the Second World War broke out, and he volunteered with the South African forces and went up. They called it up north, going up to fight the German and Italian armies in North Africa. And he was with the South African army and associated with the British army as well. Hazel was born in 1938, just before the war. And my mother was she could be very aggressive when she wanted to. And my father was in Nairobi, just north of Nairobi, in fact, in December of 1941. And she somehow got herself on a military plane, army plane, going up north with Hazel. And they flew to see my father. And my father suddenly got a message that he had to return to Nairobi from about 500 miles north, didn't know what was going on. He got back to Nairobi and my mother was there. How she managed to do that still is unknown. But I was born 9 months later, obviously in Johannesburg. But that's where I came from that association. Initially we lived in Melville, which was then a middle class neighborhood in the low side, and we had a nice existence. Hazel was very talented at school and was doing very well, and I was struggling. I went to kindergarten nearby in Auckland Park Preparatory School, and I remember failing the first year, the teachers calling me an idiot and a dunce. And I remember asking my father, what does an idiot mean? And I was doing, I was just surprised. I didn't know what these words mean. My father took me out of that school. Hazel was in the Melville elementary school and went on to Parktown Girls High, where she did very well. My father had been to school at King Edward's, and he managed to get me in there because he was an old Edwardian boy. And but King Edward's was the other side of town, so he drove every day. I would go with him in the morning, and he started his rounds, and he dropped me at school. And then I took 2 buses to come home. And I struggled with school throughout my primary school, and I've got some of the reports. And I battled. And when I finished the primary school, I made it into the high school at King Edward's, but only just. I was number 160 out of 180 boys and 30 boys in the class. So I started off on the E class, There was A, B, C, D, E, and all the best boys were in the A class and all the way down. And every year at high school, there were 5 years at high school, I moved up a grade. And that was good and bad. It was good because I was, obviously learning more, but bad because I suddenly had a different boys to be with. So I never really knew anybody well. Not only that, I couldn't play with anybody who lived nearby because I lived on the other side of town and had to take buses home. We moved from Melville to Emmarentia when I was about 12, but I remember before that, it was a very Afrikaans neighborhood, and you'd walk in the street and you just go to the store and two boys would come up to you and say, "Do you want to fight?" And it was it was that kind of aggressive Afrikaner neighborhood. Pleasant, nice, but I didn't fit in at all. Taking the buses home was a bus into the city of Johannesburg. That wasn't a bus initially, it was a tram running on rails. And then from the middle of Johannesburg, a bus out to Melbourne, and then later on we moved to Emmarentia. And it took about an hour to get home, hour and a half to get home, because you had to take a bus into the city, wait for the connecting bus, and then take a bus out of the city, like the spokes in the wheel, going across the city. When I started to prepare for my bar mitzvah, we were living in Emmarentia, and I had to go to a Hebrew school to learn Hebrew, which I kind of learned to read, I suppose. I didn't understand the word. I fought it tooth and nail. I didn't like it. And, I learned how to say the Haftarah and the various prayers that you're supposed to say. It was gibberish to me. It was just sounds, because I didn't know the meaning of the words. And so I had my bar mitzvah at a very orthodox temple called the Hasidus Shul. Again, another part of town, nowhere near where I was, but near where my grandparents had lived, where they had gone. I remember this very old shul. It was torn down before I left South Africa to make way for a new highway. But there was the upstairs for the women, downstairs for the men. They would always have pickled herring and brandy for the men to enjoy themselves. And my father would have a ticket for the high holy days. And I couldn't understand really what the service was or anything else. It was all very old Jewish men. I remember the prayer books were all printed in Riga and in Lithuania from before the war, very old prayer books. And that was the center of Jewish culture when this was established. Living in Emmarentia, living in Melbourne first, the one thing I remember my parents telling me was when the war was declared, Second World War, a lot of the Afrikaners still hated the British, and they didn't want to join the British in fighting the Germans. And there was discussion in Parliament as to whose side they would be on, although they were part of the British Commonwealth. And South Africa was a very key strategic location, the bottom of the Cape, because that's how everything came from Australia and New Zealand and India to UK through, past the ports of South Africa, Simonstown in particular. And he arranged for my sister Hazel to be adopted by a Afrikaner family, the Conradis, in case South Africa became pro-Nazi and the Jews would be in trouble. That obviously never happened, but that's how seriously they took all of that.